coming attraction.
That's the hook to get you here next Sunday.
Well, I've always had a problem with that.
With what?
Treating Mary almost as much as Jesus.
Well, you should go to the Lutheran church.
Really?
Yeah.
I did when I have any dealings with the Catholic.
We probably will not be able to get through all of this discussion to this time. So next time we'll have a full hour to discuss this. We've got about a half hour right now to try to cover everything we just saw and ask any questions and do all that. So let's not put too much on us more than we can really bear. Let's just move slowly through this and make sure we understand what this moment was all about in history and what happened here. Did I hit the right button?
Probably not.
Are we there?
Nope.
Well, I know why. I know why.
Yeah, that's
I know why.
nice. I don't know if it's real or not.
No, it's just a picture.
Looks like a cartoon.
There.
Good, okay. You see Martin Luther standing there?
Yeah,
Okay.
looks like he's having a heart attack.
Sorry.
Probably at that point was close to it, I would think.
Yeah.
Okay, Luther began as a good Roman Catholic. So let's start there. Let's start with Luther really as a Roman Catholic monk. He's nailing his 95 Theses on the church door. On October 31st, 1517, and he is posting those things, as we heard, because it was his opinion that these indulgence sellers that were running around Germany, selling little pieces of paper that were claimed that the Pope had signed them, and offering so many years out of purgatory. The plenary, there were another set of indulgences, and these are the ones that Tetzel and those guys had. There was already indulgences at work in the church, but these ones, these plenary indulgences, were promised that if you would put a couple of coins into the coffer, that whomever you wished could be set free from purgatory immediately. All their time in purgatory is over with. And so, you know, in the Middle Ages, death and the world of the next world, what happens after this life, was very imminently present to most people, because it was a time when people didn't survive long. If you lived past infancy, if you lived past birth and infancy, you were considered lucky. And then to live to an old age in those days, and by the way, old age in those days would have been the 60s. You're in your age, you've been in your 60s. So how many of you have already gone past that one? So you know, you didn't run into people that were in their 80s and 90s in the Middle Ages. It just wasn't. You were old by your 40s. And most people died in their 40s in those days, 30s and 40s. It was a very hard life. And so it's a time period when the spiritual world was very important, because death could come at any second. We live in a world where we almost don't ever think about it, really, until all of a sudden something happens in our family or someone we know passes away, and then we start thinking about it. But it was always present in the Middle Ages, and sometimes more than others, because, you know, it was the plagues and things that rolled through. At the height of the Black Plague, a third of the population of Europe was decimated. That's how imminent it was for them in that time. So they were thinking about eternity, and they wanted to make sure that, you know, Aunt Gertrude, who, you know, died last year, wouldn't have to spend too much time in purgatory. When these guys came through selling these indulgences, plenary indulgences, they thought, wow, for a couple of coins, we could set her free, spring her from her eternal rest, from her eternal, not eternal actually, in that case it would have been just very, very, very long suffering. And Luther really believed that this was not something that the Pope understood, that he didn't know that these people were out there doing this. He had no clue that the Pope was actually behind it. And so he was a good Roman Catholic monk, and he wanted to set the record straight. He wanted to let, the Pope know, hey, you know what your guys are doing up here? They're making a mockery of this. And he wanted to let them know too that they didn't have the authority, nor did the Pope have the authority to release people out of purgatory. If he did have the authority to release people out of purgatory, out of Christian charity, he ought to go and empty the place. That's what Luther says in his 95 Theses, He would probably have been a little more cautious had he realized the Pope himself was behind it. But not thinking that let Luther be a lot more bold. And so he writes these 95 Theses, and it really, really inflames the entire political situation that's been built up. I mean, they've got a pretty good thing going. They're selling for a good amount of money these little spiritual gifts.
Who would sell them?
People like Johannes Tetzel. He was a monk.
Was there like a black market of indulgences?
No.
It wasn't a black
No, it was wide
It
open.
was a black market. It was the official market.
But I mean, were there people that actually were
Commission.
authorized and commissioned to sell them?
Yes.
But then were there other ones that, try to make a fast buck?
I wouldn't put it past
Yeah.
sinners to make a fast buck with it. Either way, it's just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And so you'd go to these really well done camp meetings, kind of what they were. These indulgence sellers would come around. They'd have quite a show. It'd really be something to watch. And by the end of it, you'd be so scared and so frightened by the fires of hell that you wanted to give as much as you could to, either take care of yourself when the time came, or take care of somebody else. And why not help as many people as we can, right? As long as I get some help too. So it was very important to them at that time. And they made quite a killing off the backs of the Germans and Northern Europeans, who were by most count poor people. Pastor.
Tetzel had a little poem or phrase that he used: when the money in the box goes clink, thou soul from purgatory spring. So,
Clings and springs.
there you go.
Clink and Springs.
Clings.
Well,
He needs to work on his poetry a little.
Rings.
It was in German, so it was.
Yeah.
German sounds better.
Yeah.
Clink and Springs. Okay, got it.
What I find interesting is from the one you've shown in the picture, it's all in Latin, so these people who didn't know Latin had no idea what the paper even said.
Correct. And so that brings me to this question. What was he really trying to accomplish? Was he really trying to set the church on fire?
No, he was
trying to
tell us.
He said it straight.
Yeah. Remember, like you say, it was in Latin because he was trying to appeal to the leaders, the people who knew the Latin. He was trying to have a learned conversation about this, and learned conversation in those days was done in Latin. It was the official language that was used, especially in the church. So he wasn't trying really to set the world on fire. That was the least. He really didn't think that was going to happen. I'm sure that at the Diet of Worms, where he was forced to recant, he must have thought in the back of his head, because I would have said, how did this happen?
Yeah, really.
I was just wanting a debate. I didn't want to, get burned at the stake.
Did he finally realize that basically the church was dirty?
It took a while. He really believed, he was a good Roman Catholic monk, and he really believed in the authority of the Pope. And part of this study is how this took place to begin with. How is it that Rome became so powerful in the empire? You saw pictures here that they showed of kings bowing to the Pope. There's actually a story I can't remember the individual who it is. It just now popped into my head, and I remember the story, but I can't remember who it is that did this. But the Pope had told this king that he was not to go bring justice, what he called justice, to this other group of people, that he was to forgive them and let it go. Instead, the king sent his army and brought justice to the people. He killed the people. And the Pope excommunicated him under the threat of excommunication to the king. I think it was the Roman emperor, actually, after Constantine. Told him if he didn't stand 3 days barefoot in the snow, that he would be excommunicated. And that emperor stood for 3 days in the snow because of the Pope. How do you get that kind of power? It's a good question, and we're going to find out. Huh? What's that? Oh. Wait. There were only a couple of issues that had the Roman, that Luther had with the Roman Church at that point. Only a couple of issues, mostly having to do with indulgences and the sale of indulgences. He was still, at that time, he was still praying to the Virgin Mary and to the saints when he posted his 95 Theses. We always look back at that as the beginning of the Reformation, and indeed it was, but Luther he was not a Lutheran at this point. He was really a Roman Catholic, just trying to say, hey, there's some bad stuff happening. He was still praying to Mary and the other saints. How many of you know what saint he prayed to before he went into the monastery?
Anne?
Yeah, Saint Anne. When the lightning struck, remember he said, Saint Anne, if you save me, I'll become a monk. So he was praying to the saints. He believed and practiced transubstantiation, the idea that the priest has the sacerdotal, they use that word in there, the sacerdotal authority. That means the authority of a priest to be able to make a sacrifice so that he's able to change bread into the body and change wine into the blood of Christ. It no longer, even though it looks like bread and tastes like bread, it's body. Even though it looks like wine, tastes like wine, it's actually blood, real blood. It just doesn't look like it. So he's still doing that too. The bloodless repetition of the sacrifice on the cross at each Mass. That's still Roman Catholic doctrine. They believe that the priest has the authority not only to change the substance of the elements, but that they are actually re-sacrificing Christ for the sins of the people. That Christ is forever being re-sacrificed. That sacrifice that took place 2,000 years ago on a little hill outside of Jerusalem was not enough to atone for the sins in Roman Catholic theology, and that this is part of your justification, where you are going to be forgiven for your sins by the sacrifice of the Mass.
That's
One
blasphemy.
Lord, one God, one baptism
Yeah.
for us all.
And it is blasphemy, you're
I'm
right.
sorry, that's blasphemy.
It's pagan
You're
worship.
mocking Christ.
But Luther doesn't yet get this. He's still a good son of the Roman Church, and he doesn't yet understand it. He's going to get an education pretty soon, but it takes Luther a while to arrive at it. You know, he's grown up he's grown up in a world where this is the culture. That's just how it is.
Indoctrination.
It's indoctrination, but the whole world believed this. This is just what everybody believed, and he came to find out. Imagine yourself being the only person in all of society who sees the truth. You know, there were people ahead of Luther that said that stuff that he eventually came to realize is the truth, but they were all killed for saying it. You know, so it was like, you know, the kind of thing where you just run roughshod into it, go, well, the devil may care, I don't care. You did these things deliberately and with care.
Is he believing this before he read the Bible, the original doctrine?
Say it again?
Is he doing all this praying to the Virgin Mary and the saints and all this before he has actually read the Bible?
No. I mean, it was, most priests and monks didn't ever even see a Bible. They never did that. But Luther, when he went to go translate the scriptures, He was in the process of that while all this was going on. This is all happening at the same time. And as he's moving along, he's beginning to understand what justification really means. As he's moving along through these processes, and he's beginning to grow in his understanding of what Scripture means and what it says, and to put together the body of doctrine, the apostolic body of doctrine that was lost in the medieval days. And we're going to find out why. They kind of touched on a little bit, but the beginning, it ties in with the rise of the Roman Empire when Christianity began, and also the rise of the Roman Church becoming more important than the ones to the east, in their opinion. And that kind of created a little bit of a tension between the Eastern and Western Church, as you may imagine. It was really only the issues of the excesses that were connected with indulgences that were at issue when Luther posted his 95 Theses. That really, so you're looking at a Roman Catholic, a devout Roman Catholic monk, an Augustinian monk. He was not the reformer then. He was about to become the reformer. He was just a monk that wanted to say, let the Pope know, hey, bad stuff's happening here. We got to get this under control.
So do you think translating the Bible probably gave him total insight? And in other words, he might not have done all this if he wasn't translating the Bible and finding out what it really said.
When he began to read the Scriptures, he realized that the doctrine of justification and salvation was simple. It had become complex because of the church. And they were
socialized.
Yeah, and they were adding to the idea of salvation things that God did not require, things that God didn't command. And but the church looked at the Bible as being such a dark book, difficult to understand and difficult to interpret, that it takes someone with great learning. And so you common people need to listen to the priests.
Would be stupid.
You're too stupid to understand it. And Luther later in
I
life,
can't the Bible in my language. I'm sorry. I'm just too stupid.
in argument with Professor Eck, he
I'm just,
blows that out of the water by saying the Scriptures are so simple that a plowboy could understand them.
exactly.
But the church is fighting against the idea that the Bible should be written in the common vulgar language of the people. Vulgar doesn't necessarily mean bad words. It just means your common language. Yeah.
They think the commoner is revolting to them, and they are so much better than everybody else.
Yes.
And they think that they're closer by doing all this stuff. It brings them closer to God, and they are God. That's what they took over.
So, the vulgar language of the people, the normal everyday language, was something that the Scriptures weren't allowed to be printed in, under pain of death. Because you're hiding really the truth, That was what was happening. The church was hiding the truth. And most of them ignorantly. But the people who really knew that they were hiding the truth so that they can continue their power and their money. Money and
Jesus
power.
spoke in the common language of his day. He spoke Koine Greek. That was like the common street language.
Well, Aramaic.
Aramaic.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is he spoke the language of the people. He didn't speak in this high,
Jesus probably knew several languages.
Probably.
He most likely, he definitely would know Aramaic, because that was what he talked in every day. He would know Hebrew, because that's what they talked in the synagogue, was the Hebrew language. He would also know probably Latin, because their captors were Romans and they spoke Latin. And Greek, the Romans brought with them a Hellenistic culture, the culture of Greece. Wow. So he probably would also know Greek.
4 languages.
So he probably know, Jesus spoke many languages. I almost speak English, so.
Pastor,
Yes.
I'll bet Christ knows every language that ever existed and will ever exist in the future.
Well, that too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's that whole God thing.
But he gave up the power to become a man.
Some of
He was
it,
in
some of it.
So it seems to me that Luther was asking questions, and explain to me, I want to understand this, why
Yes.
you're doing it
Yes.
differently from what the Bible says.
Yes.
He was, he was almost convinced me that you're right.
Yes, he was really shocked
Yes.
at the Diet of Worms that he was being forced to recant without any kind of discussion. You know, he was a doctor of the church, and it's his job to help the church understand the scriptures, and he wrote about that. And he couldn't understand why the church wouldn't even give a fair hearing. What he didn't realize was that the church wasn't interested in truth. They were interested in power and money.
They had another agenda.
And you know, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? I didn't make that up.
Who did?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Oh, somebody that didn't have the power.
Yeah, right. It was due to small deviations along the way. You heard several of them bring this up. Small deviations along the way that added up over time till the scriptures no longer were being followed. The doctrine no longer resembled the apostolic doctrine of the church. It was far afield. And it was just simple little things that started, and they just began to grow, and people built on those things. Some of them were pretty ridiculous. It was a pressing question in the early church, what to do with the lapsed. Those, they were called lapses, you heard that. And they were brought to the emperor, to the statue of the emperor, and they'd have to give some alms, and it was considered worship of the emperor, because at that point, the emperor had taken on this divine sort of character. He was God king. That was not unusual in the ancient world. But, you know, for Christians and Jews, it's not something that devout believers can do. You can't worship a false god. You know, I had a Presbyterian friend who went to India, and he was in India for a mission trip. And while he had some time off, they went to one of these real famous Hindu temples. And you have to take your shoes off to go inside. And he was getting ready to take his shoes off, and all of a sudden he stopped, and he started putting his shoes back on again. And the guard said, "No, you have to take your shoes off." And he said, "I can't go in." And the guard was like, "What's going on?" And he said the first thing that hit his head when he was getting ready to go in is, "You shall have no other gods. You shall not bow down, you shall not worship them." And he refused to go into the pagan temple. Now, I don't know whether he was right or wrong in that, but he felt like the Holy Spirit was telling him not to go. That's the kind of devotion that we're dealing with these people that in the ancient world, when they were forced to come up and serve another person as if he were God. They were not about to worship and serve somebody else, First Commandment stuff, right? But some, in fear of their lives, capitulated. But later were sorry for it, and they came back to the church, and the church treated them very harshly. Why do you think that the church treated them harshly?
Lost their power over them.
Well, no, they didn't lose their power. They came back to the church. They wanted to come back to the church. Say again?
Understand?
Yeah, but why? Why would they be so harsh? Why?
They stood up to them, and they embarrassed them and told them, basically showed everybody that they weren't going to follow them like sheep.
Well, now these are the ones that did capitulate and did give the money, and they came back to the church, in the early church, to be forgiven and to be a part of the church again, because they had lapsed and gone away from the church by serving the false god.
So they wouldn't do it again.
Well, as an example, but the meanness of the spirit, the mean spirit of this. Think about it. Not everybody lapsed. There are people in that church who have family members who were killed for this. And you lapsed and you ran away under persecution and you were afraid? And now you want to come back and have us just forgive you? As if forgiveness is what the church is about?
What it is about.
Oh, yeah.
But not that.
Pastor?
Yes.
It's so that you never have anybody else ever do it again. You make an example of the ones that tried to leave and then came back, so you never have anybody ever do it again. To make an example of the first ones, nobody's gonna do it again. You guys look at how badly they were treated. They were saying 40 years, 20 years.
20 years laying in
Those people were
the
doing
doorway of the church?
Whatever they were doing. 20 years is a long time, because you're gonna have 2 generations at that time, you know, real close to it.
Yeah, then, you know, and then,
And the kids see this and say, well,
Yeah.
why is Uncle Jack over there laying in front of the church?
yeah,
Well, because he did this. Oh.
don't do that.
And they're not gonna do it, they're not gonna do it, because they don't wanna have to lay in front of the church for 20 years.
Well, that's gotta be in there in the mix too. I mean,
I think a lot of it just means that it's like you can see the people that sympathize with the Nazis. In
Sure.
France and in Holland, and
Sure.
paraded through the streets with their heads were shaved and things like that.
you know,
Symbol just-
it's partly the example. It's also because, hey, we fought, a lot of us died to free France. And here you go sympathizing with the enemy, and yeah, you know, there's a good deal of that in there. The idea that, hey, Uncle Jack has to lay here because, you know, Uncle Jethro, he didn't give in and he actually died believing. You know, he was put to death. And so you're gonna, you know, shave their heads and make them walk through the streets. God could see the heart of the penitent, but men can't see it. So penitence is true sorrow. Penance provided an answer for showing what was in your heart. So you do penance to show what's in your heart. You see, there's nothing wrong with making restitution for a sin, especially if your sin has harmed somebody else. For example, if you have harmed somebody and you try to make up for it by doing something good for them, there's nothing wrong with that. That's something that's laudable. However, it does not rely upon, you know, your deeds to be forgiven.
Oh, that's where they make a mistake.
With humans, maybe. I mean, personally, if somebody does something and they don't want to apologize, I have a problem with that. To me, you know, I don't like that. But God still can forgive, and you can still feel sorrow for what you've done, even if you don't have a chance. But God looks at the heart. He sees your heart. I can't see your heart, but I can see what you do. So I'll see, and the same thing with faith. I can't see faith, but I can see what faith does or doesn't do.
The fruit.
Yeah. You understand what I'm saying, everybody? So that's how penance got started. It started where it was trying to make restitution for sin, and then it became codified, and then it became the way that you get yourself right with God. It just all of a sudden grew.
That was the mistake
Yes.
at that point.
Yeah. It's starting with the idea that you have to do this, rather than it being the desire of your heart to do this because of your sorrow that you feel inside your heart. Let's see, we got one more
So
here.
you said they treat him bad. Now, the reason for that is?
Because they lapsed in their faith.
Yeah, I know that part, but why would you treat him bad instead of treating him nice?
Well, because they were upset that these people, instead of staying faithful,
Right.
they denied Christ, and then they wanted to come back to the church. But Uncle Johnny, when he was up there, he didn't lapse.
Right.
And now, why should you be a part of this church where he was faithful and you were a coward?
That proved that you were sorry.
Yeah, prove it. You got to prove you're sorry here.
Wait a minute, something just dawned on me. Peter, the apostle, he denied Jesus 3 times, and the last time he denied him, the third time, I don't know what he said, but being a sailor, I'm sure he had quite a vocabulary on him. Profanity coming out of his mouth, drawing down curses on him. I don't know the man, and yet Jesus didn't reject him and say, I'm sorry, Peter, you have to do 10,000 Hail Marys first, and you have to walk up these stairs, and then you can come back and I'll be forgiving you.
Right.
No, Jesus said, I forgive you, Peter, I restore you.
Again, on the shore of the lake.
John
When-
chapter 21.
Yeah, when he jumped off the
He
thing.
didn't
and
have to do a bunch of,
And he asked him, do you love me? Feed my sheep. 3 times. Yeah. The restoration. 3 times he denied, 3 times he said that
I
he
think the
believed.
church needed to look back at that in this situation.
But, once again, the Bible was not something the church really used much. It was all tradition coming down from apostolic authority through the priest, and that was the fatal mistake, was put Luther to translating the scriptures, because all of a sudden he said, hey, wait a minute. The guy behind the curtain is lying to us.
Pay attention to that.
All right, so we're gonna pick up with this thing. Why did these acts of penance become so important? Okay, next time. But it's